this day would be important for those of us who are formed in the religious life. It's often a day when things would happen. It was the day when I was shaved, given a habit and a new name, and therefore it follows that one makes one's vows a year later, and so on and so on. And so one relives the graces of years gone by. And the grace in the air is different for each soul, for each day, but it's always a form of what's going on in this gospel. I remember the abbot in France coming out with one teaching in chapter one morning, because he used to give powerful chapters before Lord's early. He would speak little but well and have a point for the day. And one he gave way back in 1974 was this: the bell, even the electric bell, sonnerie, it's not just a bell, it's the angel. I'll make a parenthesis. In the bell in Selignac, it was written on it, Vox Delecti, the voice of the beloved. In other words, the bell, which by the way was consecrated with chrism, when ringing was the voice of the Lord. And by doing so, we were being called, as we were, to an encounter with the grace of the moment. We were also taught, this time by the novice master, that when we went into choir, it was not necessarily that we were going actually to pray, but it was, he put it this way, an occasion in which we can pray, trying to get us to be aware that it's not enough to go and to be an automatic pilot. He was reminding us that that bit, the other bit, depends on our response to grace. And we were taught also how some mystics were given to see the difference. You might see, through a mystic soul like St. Bernard, the angels above the brethren. And in fact, at La Trappe we had angel wings sculpted on the choir doors, as the novice master taught us, to remind us that when we were singing in conspectu angelorum, in the presence of the angels. And St. Bernard was shown one time how it was very unequal with regard to what the angels had to carry up. Some had a great deal, others far less, and some nothing at all. Now, therefore, we were taught from the beginning the importance of getting into mode. In fact, St. Bernard, when he went into church with all Europe on his shoulder, remember he preached the crusade and all that, and all these churches, monasteries, foundations on his shoulder, including actually nearby Mellifont, he founded it from Clairvaux. Well, despite that, when he would go from the cloister into the abbey church, he would take the holy water and say to his problems, Restez ici, et je vous reprendrai en sortant. Stay here, and I'll take you up again when I come out. So, when he was in choir, he was in mode, and brought the brethren after him. Therefore, also, the very strict rule we had with regard to making any human noise at all in church. And that's when the Trappist language came in very useful. We were taught, actually on a weekly basis with classes, how to use the sign language and how to start off with words and then to go into sentences. But it meant that the human voice was not heard in the house. It worked. And that then gives the space in which even outside the divine office one can be in mode. It's not just finished then. And in fact, the whole ethos is going in and coming out, as it were, dovetailing and gliding. There's no compartmentalization of things. It's going towards and coming out and remaining in mode. And the whole education of the monk went in that direction. It was one straight line, a continuum. And one also carried on throughout the work, because if one was in silence in work, it was the same as the Desert Fathers. They were able to carry on the prayer. In their case, it was very simple. Repeating words, prayers, psalms, but not talking to each other. And by the way, It's still maintained in strict monasteries, east and west. And I remember having been greatly hipped by what I happened to see on YouTube in one of those rare bits of footage that they managed to get from Mount Athos. And there the evidence is that actually all the time the monks, and there are thousands of them there, are working, whether it's actually in making icons or in working manually, picking fruit. If you look carefully, the lips are always moving. Jesus, Christe, Io Teo, and so on. Eleison, Emer, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And they're not stopping all the time, which means precisely that all their life is in mode. Now, something of that we can do. Why? Because if we take seriously Holy Communion, especially if it's happening early in the morning, it doesn't stop. It becomes spiritual from being physical, but that bit we can nourish. Why? We have the guest, and he's there to stay. And the whole education that we had went into that mode, looking inwards and engaging with the guest, the contemplative life. There's not a moment in which one is not switched on. The being read to at meals, everything protected it. A continuous, ongoing dialogue and communion. So over a lifetime, one straight line, a continuum of engaged heart and mind and love, is a mode of existence which is jolly interesting with regard to one's copybook at the end. And Thomas Merton comments all this, indicating how the simple fact of not talking but going one after the other, we were taught that as well, going backwards and forwards to work, one behind the other, not side by side. Pour sauvegarder le silence, it's to safeguard silence. And Thomas Merton comments this, noticing how the brethren were doing that, saying the rosary, coming and going to the field or wherever it might be. How many souls are being saved by those simple rosaries? Therefore, it was all time used well. Of course, old Nick knows it well. If he can make sure that in a monastery they're doing everything but that, e.g. being in fraternity, talking to each other, making of work a glorified recreation, he's made the monastery a useless enterprise and made, therefore, the church that much poorer. If you don't believe me, look over your shoulders and see what goes on. It wasn't like that before, and it need not be like that again. And by the way, the monasteries that attract are precisely those that keep and know their raison d'être. I've seen that. A big one for now would be Sefron in France, the strictest Trappist monastery, getting all the vocations, and on it goes. With regard, therefore, to what's happening, it happens in anything that is of divine providence, because God is always present in his language, which is providence. Right now, he's speaking to us here. He brought us here, some for the first time. Therefore, there's no accident. It's a God incidence, and he has a word for us. But it's the same with all the events. God is present in his providence. Our great mystic, Gina of Norwich, in her reclusory, had, amongst her many intuitions, visions, and scenes seen there in solitude, one beautiful one of this scene. The Blessed Virgin had the age of about 15, little damsel, and her quaint English is always small words, simple words. And she has the Virgin speak like this: "Lo me, God's handmaid." And that was her attitude. When I was growing up, Cliff Richard had lots of records around, and one of the great ones was The Young Ones, which also, by the way, is quite deep. Tomorrow, or wait until tomorrow, for tomorrow sometimes never comes. The grace is right here. But on the flip side was Cliff and the Shadows singing, wait for it, "We say, yeah." Well, that's actually our mode of saying fiat. Yes to the grace of the present moment as it comes to us. It's sometimes unprogrammed. I notice some very good priests here and there were very organized, very well organized and prepared, and things therefore happen very smoothly. The only thing is that sometimes, if they're like that, they have difficulty in coping with the unprogrammed, and they lose their pedals, and off they go into another mode which wasn't quite calculated. So, therefore, this extra bit has to be added, being as elastic as the Holy Spirit and as Providence itself wants us to be. In other words, we adjust ourselves to the new unprogrammed manifestation of the divine will. Otherwise, what's happening? We will over God. And the total saying yes means willing everything, even the unexpected and unprogrammed. It comes across, by the way, in our encounters with each other. A person feels it straight away at the door, at the phone, if we're giving the impression that that person is a nuisance. Do you think we don't feel it? It's a whole education to make that person feel the only person in the universe, even from the first movement. Now, I want to go into this question of collaboration with grace briefly and yet essentially, because grace, as I say, tailors itself to each vocation, but it's the action of God nevertheless. Why do so many souls end up in purgatory? They messed up the grace. I've mentioned before this, which I translated from the French, the Purgatory manuscript, but it was a nun who didn't collaborate with grace, as she should have, and ended up in a mess. And after 2 years in the Great Purgatory, was able to make herself known to this other nun who had tried to help her, but she hadn't listened. So she's trying to get through to her as time goes on, and she explains the different degrees of purgatory. And also a lot about what goes on with regard to the visits of the other side, the good side. We see St. Michael as one sees, in inverted commas, angels. He hasn't a body. He comes to purgatory to fetch all the souls which have been purified. And by the way, that same soul explains how she saw St. Michael at her death and was, as it were, the one who executed the judgment. That even though the soul can't be carried, it was as though the soul was guided to its place. She also saw her guardian angel at death. So he comes to purgatory to fetch all the souls which have been purified. And this is after they've got there for a while. He's the one who leads them to heaven. Yes, it's true, he's among the seraphim. Saraf in Hebrew is to burn. They're the burning ones, close to the throne. Normally, therefore, they wouldn't have active work, if you like, they'd have contemplative work. As Monsignor said, this is something that the retreat master had given in this retreat that they were at. He is the first of the angels in heaven. Of course, he wasn't, it was Lucifer. And he was given greater power. And he rallied the other angels because Lucifer wanted the whole lot with him. Managed to get a third, roughly. So, he is the first of the angels in heaven. Our guardian angels come to see us too. That's curious. By the way, we can only have one guardian angel, and one guardian angel can only have one soul. There's a huge number of souls, it's kind of infinite. Of angels. We don't know the number of them, but it's actually pretty big. They're all over the place. Consecrated churches have an angel, a nation has an angel, and so on. So, our guardian angels come to see us too, but St. Michael is so much more powerful than they. As for the Blessed Virgin, we see her with her body. She comes to purgatory on her feast days, and that's partly why I'm bringing this up today. It's her feast day. So, she's been helping these souls. And this Holy Mass is offered for the Holy Souls, so this is an area where we're very close to the beyond, and the fringe between the spheres of time and eternity, human and divine, angelic, is all very thin right now at the altar. And by the way, if we use the old Roman canon, we have that pause after the consecration, when actually the priest traditionally looks at the consecrated host and names names, and you can do the same. It's powerful, that moment. So she comes to purgatory on her feast days and returns to heaven with many souls. While she is with us, our suffering stops. St. Michael comes with her, but when he's on his own, our sufferings continue as usual. I was taught way back in the novitiate that it was a secret amongst the French clergy, because we were taught by those who had been formed way back in the 30s and so on. It was if you go back in time, they were teaching us the old classic secrets of the priesthood. And he was saying there's a secret. It's if you have an intention which you really want to get, say a Mass for the Holy Souls. And by the way, a benefactor which will remain anonymous has asked me to celebrate every week a Mass for the Holy Souls. And therefore, we can imagine the gratitude of those souls towards that benefactor. We're never outdone generosity with regard to the Holy Souls. And I've heard that some people who had a job of getting something even with intention offered through the saints, when they came to the Holy Souls, had surprises. It had a great devotion. Now, I'm going into the degrees. When I spoke to you of the grand purgatory, le grand purgatoire, and of the second purgatory, it was in order to make you understand. What I meant by that was that there are different degrees in purgatory. Thus, I call grand purgatory the place in which are found those souls which are most guilty, where I remained for 2 years without being able to give any sign of my torments. They say, by the way, that those don't receive the help of the suffrages. They're kind of really down there, and some should not really be there, they should be further down still, but the Lord has just managed to clinch something either from their past or from somebody who in the future perhaps will pray for them, make it that they don't go to that place where there's no return. Abandon hope, all ye that enter here, would say Dante. And by the way, the theologians tell us that the Great Purgatory at least and hell work on the same heating system. So, these down there, and it would seem there's some kind of geography involved because there is a movement of souls and therefore there's a great heat involved there. And it's, as it were, downwards the movement corresponds actually to what we seem to see from physics, what's in the middle of the earth. And you know, by the way, that recent instruments have detected strange things. The lowest we can get is the seabed, and in certain parts of the world, like the Pacific Ocean, is extremely close. At the furthest part down we can get, in water, on this planet, it's only about a mile between that point and the other side, whatever that may be. And strange things happen in that no man's land. Strange things come out with horrible faces, able to do strange things. And that strange boring, which they did way back in Siberia, when it was still communist, Soviet bloc, for a few seconds, they picked up on their instruments this horrible, horrible howling, screaming. It would seem that it was actually that place. And it was so hot, of course, that the instruments burned, but it was recorded about 30 seconds, and you can hear it on YouTube. It was all hush-hush, of course, because that wasn't supposed to be known. Now, thus I call grand purgatory the place in which I found those souls which are most guilty, where I remained for 2 years without being able to give any sign of my torments. And then, the year in which you heard my complaints, you know that I was still there when I began to speak to you. Now what's going on is that she's able, as time goes on, in recompense for the other one's suffrages and sufferings for her, to answer questions. And this is what came down in her diary. It was very well hidden during her life, but after her death it went round. Now, the second purgatory, which is still purgatory, albeit different from the first, one's suffering is still great, but smaller than in the first. Now you know that theologically you've got the two things, la peine du don, the pain of loss, absence of beatific vision, because the soul is made for that, and la peine des sens, the pain of the senses, the torment of the senses. And these are spiritual senses, because the soul has commanded the body, and therefore no body is there anymore. The soul is getting, because of its responsibility, in its spiritual senses, the pain. It's as it were restituting to God and to the order of things what is thieved and filched, out of order. It has to be restored. If it's not done in this world, it's got to happen somewhere. So this bit, the pain of senses, now that can be diminished and eventually go, leaving only the other. Now, so, albeit different from the first, well, suffering is still great, but smaller than in the first. Last of all, there is a third place, the purgatory of desire. Here we have only the pain of loss. The soul is yearning and borne away. There's no more distraction, so the pain is intense there. It's really made for God. There is no fire there, therefore the pain of the senses is gone. In it are the souls which have not had a sufficiently great desire for heaven, nor sufficient love for God. That's where I am at present, but she's known the other before. What is more, in these three purgatories, there are many degrees, so it's all unequal within them. As the soul is progressively purified, it does not suffer the same torments. Everything is proportioned to the faults it has to expiate. So on she goes, and the whole thrust of this is that she's warning her, and therefore us through her, that it's serious business, and we don't imagine what it involves to be ready to see God. And we handle our spiritual life, keeping it on the back burner more or less. We'll get there. Got a shock coming. Are you now, she goes on to say, going to shake yourself out of it and give yourself once and for all to God? Now, that's a warning to a holy nun, and therefore to us. We mustn't be lazy, casual, or presumptuous in our spiritual life. There's another reason too, it's this. We can't, either on the spiritual level or actually on the human level, have true intimacy if we're not delicate. Watch relationships on a deep level, either in a community, same sex, or in a marriage, opposite sexes. The question of delicacy is sort of the same, though lived under different modalities. Do we feel the other person's pain? Do we anticipate the other person's wish? If we do, then we avoid the pain. Delicacy means we feel, and even by anticipation, we desire to please. Now bring that to the quality of the saints and it's total. But we sort of do it. And we sort of have intimacy, therefore, with Christ. As between the best of lovers, it only half works. So this, my friends, I leave with you because it's essentially the gospel. The angel on bended knees, with the courtesy of God, is asking for permission for God to act. And we have to say, fiat. Or as the shadows say, we say, yeah.